My name is Susan Lang. I am the founding president and CEO of Lyme Connect, and it is my honor to host our session today that is in celebration of International Day of Persons with Disabilities. And this is a very important discussion about disability and strength in leadership. We are excited to have Mike MacKay and Jonathan Goldstein join us for a chat. And so I'm going to start with a little bit of an overview on Lyme Connect and on disability. So Lyme Connect's mission is to focus on attracting, preparing, and, well, our mission is to rebrand disability through achievement. We're focused on attracting, preparing, and connecting high potential professionals and university students who have all types of disabilities for scholarships, leadership programs, and full-time and internship careers with the world's leading companies who are our corporate partners. And we also support our partners in not only recruiting, but onboarding, developing, promoting, and retaining all of their employees who have disabilities. We have our Lyme community, and if you are not a part of this, I'll encourage you to join on our website. That community is designed for 4 distinct groups. One is the Lyme Network, people who have disabilities. Second is our corporate partner group, where you can access all kinds of training. Third, our university partners. And fourth is Friends of Lyme, which is for allies, coworkers, etc. Disability is defined as a physical or mental condition that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And 61 million adults and 8 million in the US and 8 million adults in Canada have a disability, which equates to 1 in 4 North Americans. When we talk about disability on campus, 1 in 5 plus, that's an under number. Students on campuses today have a disability. Almost 1 in 3, 30% of white collar corporate employees have a disability. If you're watching this from your office, look around you and know that almost 1 in 3 of your colleagues have disabilities. So disabilities are visible and largely non-visible, including learning and attention issues, medical conditions, mental health, and much more. I will say that I have anxiety and depression, and so I am a part of the non-visible disability group myself. Disabilities, the impact on a disability can be learning, intellectual, mental, communication, physical, sensory, or social relationships. And barriers for people with disabilities can include technology, physical barriers, policies, practices, assumptions, language and action, and inclusion and culture. But we are very big on understanding and focusing on the strengths that people with disabilities possess, often as a result of their disability. So some strengths can include problem solving, leadership that we're going to talk about today, strategic thinking, resilience. Specialized skills can be patterns and systems, communication and listening, technology, accessibility, and more. And that will end my screen sharing. I would like now to introduce and welcome Jonathan Goldstein. Jonathan is the head of member experience for CVS Health's Affordable Care Act business and leads initiatives focused on NPS, member retention, digital engagement, and health quality management. In addition to his day job, Jonathan is the national co-chair of CVS Health's disability-focused business and colleague resource group, Capabilities, an organization of 2,100 members focused on promoting disability inclusion across all of CVS Health's lines of business. Jonathan lives in New York City. He also serves as the board chair of Lyme Connect's NextGen Board. He is a 2015 Lyme Connect Fellow, has been involved with us for many years, and serves on the board of the TSC Alliance, which is a rare disease nonprofit organization. So thank you, Jonathan. I'll kick it over to you to let you get started with Mike.
Thank you so much, Susan, and really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. and really grateful to you, Mike, for taking out the time to join all of us. Before we dive in, I'd like to just give a brief background about Mike. And in addition to his leadership and service with the Lime Connect board, Mike has over 25 years of experience driving growth, innovation, and cultural transformation throughout his time with Bloomberg. His career has spanned diverse markets and industries, and he's worked in numerous roles and positions around the globe. Currently, Mike serves as the Chief Operating Officer of Sales and Service at Bloomberg Industry Group, where he leads strategy, planning, reporting, and operations. And after several years serving on the board of Lime Connect, Mike became the board chair in October of 2020 and serves as the executive sponsor of Bloomberg Industry Group's employee resource group focused on abilities, Be Able. Outside of work, Mike is married and has 2 wonderful teenage kids who keep him busy. But whenever that isn't the case, you'll likely see Mike trying to sneak out for a bike ride. And Mike, I may need to take you up on a lesson for riding a bike, because having grown up in Manhattan, that is still not something I've checked off my list. Mike, to kick us off, could you share with this audience how you became involved with Lime Connect?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. And thank you for everybody who's joining us for this session. Just a quick disclaimer, I am not a professional in any of this, but I am a straight shooter. So I know we have some Q&A at the end. I'm happy to answer anything that you ask, and I'll share as much as I can between now and then. So as you mentioned, I've been at Bloomberg my entire career once I graduated university, and was fortunate enough to be in an organization that has always had an enormous commitment to philanthropy. And I was part of a leadership and development program that, as one of the focuses of that program, they encouraged us to find a not-for-profit that Bloomberg had a partnership with that we could volunteer with. And the thought was that it would be mutually beneficial. Hopefully it was for Lime Connect. It certainly was for me. And it was an opportunity to both volunteer some time, grow, volunteer in ways that would help me continue to grow in my professional career, and also contribute at the same time. Bloomberg has a lot of not-for-profits that it's involved with, and for me, finding the right one was really important. Like everybody, we are often short on time. At the time, my now teenagers were young, little babies, and so it was really important that I found an organization that resonated with me, that would be a priority. And I have a massive personal connection with Lime Connect and its mission. I'm dyslexic. I also have a physical disability with limited use of my right hand after having an accident when I was a teenager, and have multiple other connections to the space as well. So it seemed like a great match. And once I met Susan, there was no turning back.
No, really appreciate that background, Mike. And I resonate a lot with what you shared. I joined the network during my time in university, and just meeting the staff and seeing the passion behind this organization and the community that is part of this network. It really does draw you in, and it's has a pretty lasting effect on the folks that this organization is able to touch. So that's really helpful background for everyone. I want to sort of think about this theme, right? We're thinking about disability and strength, and oftentimes many people with disabilities, and also those without disabilities, have an implicit association of disability with obstacles and challenges. How do you view disability and strength as synonymous?
Yeah, I think, and as I was thinking about some of the things we'd be talking about, a lot of the issues that we are wrestling with being in the disability space are not unique to our position in the disability space, meaning what's good in how we might approach things resonates across any cohort. But I think for us, maybe the opportunity getting it right and the opportunity cost of getting it wrong is greater. And so, this is a very personal thing, and it's something that every one of us has to wrestle with and figure out what's right. But I think being able to be really honest with yourself about what are your strengths, we all have them, what are our challenges, we all have those, and leaning into both is critical. And where to draw the line with both of those is what is so personal. So on one hand, we have, speaking for myself personally, I have real gifts and things that I need to make sure that I'm leveraging to maximize what I can contribute. There's real challenges. There's things that I needed to make a conscientious decision about what I was not going to let be a challenge and how I would be creative and persistent and figure out how to overcome. And then there were things that I had to be honest with myself that I would recognize were an area that I might need help with. And I think what's important is that is something that you have to wrestle with individually, because the other side of it is we're surrounded by people who do all these incredible things and reimagine how to overcome hurdles. So don't listen to what other people are telling you are your abilities or inabilities. You need to figure that out. But an example just for myself, when I had my accident with my hand, I had been a righty. I needed to learn how to be a lefty. My handwriting was always atrocious as a righty. It still is as a lefty. That part didn't change, but something like tennis was a hobby that I wanted to figure out how to play again. And so that was something that took a lot of perseverance to go from being a righty to a lefty and being able to do things like toss the ball for a serve with a hand that didn't function the way that it had previously. For some people, that might be something that they would have said like, you know what, that's probably not worth it for me. And that's okay. For me, that was something that was a priority. And so I really wanted to work hard to figure it out. And in doing that, like, that's the kind of stuff that also enhances other strengths I think that I have, and I'm able to apply to the rest of my life in other ways too. So one last maybe example there was academics. For me, I was not a great student. I joke about it, but it was very true. I think my mom cried at every single parent-teacher conference we ever had, and she went to all of them. And yet I was motivated and ambitious, but I wasn't a great student. And there was, I was at a weird age where I was old enough or young enough that my learning disability was diagnosed, and yet old enough that they didn't quite know what to do with that once we knew I had a learning disability. I decided that, I needed to figure out how to have a resume that was beyond my GPA and my transcripts. And so through college, focusing on my internship became really important. And that was a way that I thought I could stand out and grow and begin to have something to show my strengths that wouldn't let me only be defined by my GPA or my school transcripts. And that became, I think, actually ultimately how I landed at Bloomberg, and also a really important part of my growth professionally.
Yeah, thank you for just sort of giving those examples. And as an avid tennis fan myself, right, professional athletes find it really hard to make that adjustment, right? So let alone thinking about the way that you've sort of approached your career, education, and just day-to-day living. It seems like being adaptable and sort of embracing the ambiguity is something that you've had to sort of naturally come into. And I, for myself, as a person with a disability, have a chronic health condition called tuberous sclerosis complex, and it affects, folks in different ways from physical health to learning disabilities. I really resonate with what you shared about just, having to sort of, have that glass half full approach, but also, there may be alternative learning methods, right? For those of us in the community, it may be on the job experience and sort of beefing up your credentials that way. And having to just, make modifications as needed. So I think it's really helpful to hear that kind of message. I'm curious, from your vantage point, given where you are in your career now, a lot of folks in the disability community who work in business careers or aspire to work in business careers, may have this perception that the way that you progress is you do the job well, but you also avoid highlighting experiences that make you different, where you're trying to really focus on performance and make that the priority. What are your thoughts on how to leverage your personal experiences as an asset, and how that can inspire change and progress?
Yeah, it's a good question. And like so much of what we're talking about, again, I think just what I share that was my approach isn't necessarily something that will work for everybody. It's such a personal thing, and a lot of that goes back to what are your ultimate goals, and not everybody's goals are going to be the same. For me, first, I think you have to be honest with yourself about that. What are you truly trying to accomplish and achieve, and how are you going to do that? I've always thought, and it probably took me a while to get comfortable with this, but those differences that make me unique, and again, everybody has those differences, everybody has those unique qualities, and so it was more of trying to own that and use it as a positive way to differentiate myself rather than something that I was afraid of. Now that's a fine line, and there's areas where that's easy to talk about. If it's about my strengths, it's harder to be as transparent perhaps about my weaknesses. And how you do that, I think, is important as well. I think being authentic in general is usually the right approach, and generally that's going to translate into a valuable way of handling things in general. For me, it was thinking about where can I really lean in on my strengths and where do I need help on my weaknesses. And so while it wasn't something where, if my boss asked me to do something, I needed to pause and say, like, well, let me remind you of my weaknesses, or let me refer to my various disabilities. No, I focused on the task at hand, but I needed to be at least open about where I might need help, and as well. I think that has also allowed me to focus on building strong teams, being part of a strong team, looking for ways to contribute, but also looking at where I needed assistance as well. And that realization has helped shape, I think, my overall work philosophy, which has helped me be successful in multiple areas, or in a variety of areas.
Yeah, it reminds me when I started, my career at CVS Health. I was really ambivalent whether I would want to be involved in the disability community, let alone contemplate disclosing my disability. And I think for my first couple of years, I sort of held off, and I realized that for myself, I think that was actually counterproductive. And I think to your point, Mike, like there's not every situation necessarily calls for talking about your disability, or even feeling compelled to disclose or even to self-identify. But I think about the work I do now and, thinking about member experience, we have members who have chronic health needs all the time, and being able to empathize with, what they might be going through and sort of parallels in the disability community, or they really can be an asset. And, when you mentioned, um, focusing on strengths, but also not necessarily being afraid to highlight, challenges and being authentic. I think that's really important. And it reminds me of when a Lyme mentor of mine told me, I was doing case interview preparation at one point, and one of the accommodations I had always received, in college and high school, et cetera, was extended time on exams. And I was afraid to actually, request the accommodation because of internalized like ableism and questioning whether I actually deserved it or whether I actually needed it. And, I've never ever after having that bad experience where I sort of questioned myself and what I needed, I've never sort of fallen into that trap again. But it's a continual struggle, I think, to sort of be authentic, and to say what you need, and that's not necessarily a weakness. There's actually a strength in vocalizing, what might be necessary for your career, and just from an equitability perspective. So I guess kind of building off of what you mentioned before, like, has it taken time for you to get there? Is that something that you can sort of ongoing and continually work through? Just kind of curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I definitely haven't figured out that right balance. It's something I have struggled with, continue to struggle with, and I anticipate I will continue to struggle with it. I think that's kind of par for the course with being honest about it with yourself. I'm sure everybody resonates with some of the same things. My disabilities are a big part of who I am. They're a big part of what's made me who I am. And yet they are not all of who I am. And wanting people to understand that, and both sides of that, is important to me. And yet, one, not something you can fully control, and two, difficult. So that's definitely something I've wrestled with. In work, I didn't really talk about my dyslexia for many years. And so people assumed my connection to the disability space was specifically because of my physical disability with my hand. And it was several years later that I actually started talking about my learning disability and my dyslexia. Ironically, my dyslexia probably impacts me both positively and negatively more than my hand with any of my work. So being able to address that, I think is important. But again, it's, how you do that is a personal thing. And there's a lot of factors, both what you individually are comfortable with, the relationships that you have with people you work with, the company that you work for, et cetera. But again, I would go back to, generally speaking, I think in most cases, if you fall back on being authentic, you will win more than you lose.
Yeah,
I think one other thing, Jonathan, sorry.
No, of course.
Yeah, that I kind of wrestled with in that was, as I have grown more as an advocate for this space as well, and have a position where I can, or a platform for that with my involvement with our ERG around the ability space. It was also about trying to figure out how to manage that too. And one of the things I love about Lyme Connect is its focus on achievement rather than its focus on disability rights. And not that the latter is not important, it's critical. It's just, I love being able to change hearts and minds by showing them the positive when you can. And that's not the only approach. It's really important that people focus on both. But as part of that in work, also, I've tried to decide what are the things I will fight and what are the things that I will push for progress on? What are the things that are really an issue of right or wrong versus having a longer term view of influencing change and yet needing to sometimes be a little bit more, maybe I needed to take a back seat on certain things that weren't necessarily so critically right or wrong in order to have that long-term progress. And that's something else that I think I've struggled with, but I think it's probably a pretty common issue across other people in similar situations.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important, and it reminds me, as someone who's also involved in in ERG space, that highlighting partnerships and business outcomes, as a result of disability considerations or even partnering with an ERG. I feel like that can help sort of make that longer term case, to your point about it's really important that we sort of focus on right and wrong, but where there are opportunities for improvement, not being afraid to work on the incremental opportunities for improvement and to develop connections through that authentic engagement that lead to long-term change. And it makes me think how we partnered with a business unit at my company and talked about the needs of focusing on disability from a consumer perspective, and how we believed it could yield certain results. We did a pilot program together, and it had really good financial outcomes. So I think to your point, it's sort of getting your foot in the door and being able to make sure that you have those authentic connections, and a lot of good things can come from that. So really, really good advice there. So in terms of guidance and advice, what guidance do you have for individuals with disabilities who might be looking to identify mentors or sponsors, and for those folks who might say, I haven't yet found a sponsor, and for folks who may not be aware of sponsor, someone who directly advocates for your career advancement, your career growth, what guidance do you have for folks in building that support system?
First, I think it's important the way you phrased the question differentiated mentors and sponsors, and I think often people confuse or conflate the two, and they are really different. In my opinion, mentors are people you can, or somebody you can ask to be your mentor, and you still need to drive that relationship, but you have a lot more control with it because it's something that I can go and ask multiple people, will you mentor me? They'll either say yes or no, and then I can drive the conversation to leverage that relationship. I've always believed sponsors are something that you have to earn, and that you don't actually have the right to ask somebody to be your sponsor. You have to earn that. And it is a lot harder to find somebody who is willing to be your sponsor. My approach to it has always been that it has to, at a minimum, it has to be a mutually beneficial relationship. And so for me, it was looking for somebody who I could contribute value to, and it was somebody for me at work that I tried to go above and beyond to support. And I felt that in doing that, there was value in the just for my own growth and exposure and things like that. But it also, any success that I had in that relationship then made that individual more likely to want to sponsor me, because one, I think we developed a relationship where they cared about me, but also they benefited from my success as well. So I was really lucky. I had somebody fairly early on in my career who grew into that sponsor for me. But to be clear too, the relationship started, it was not anything glorious or glamorous. It was, I think I became the person that got all the ship projects, to be honest. And you know, the relationship was when there was a project that nobody else wanted to do or just needed to get done and they didn't quite know who should do it, they would throw it to me. And I was motivated to try and differentiate myself, and knew that I wasn't going to differentiate myself as the expert or the smartest person in the room. I needed to do it through showing maybe more hard willingness to work hard, and just get stuff done. And that created a relationship where then that individual would look for the next opportunity, the next harder project, the next thing to throw at me. And through that progress and through that growth, that person then started also identifying roles and responsibilities that pushed me beyond anything I had ever imagined for myself. And the job then for me was to just, I think, have some trust and say yes, when she pushed me into new opportunities. And it took me on a career journey that I never imagined. So not everybody is as fortunate, I think, to find that sponsor, and it is a lot of hard work. I guess I would encourage everybody to approach it rather from a position of entitlement, not to be harsh, but instead really look to be valuable to somebody. And I think that is actually the better path to finding a real sponsor.
Yeah, I think bottom line is really, you know, whether you're early in career, mid-career, even later in career, say yes to things, and those conversations and those relationships are a two-way street. So like the value that you're giving is also probably going to be reciprocated in valuable learning experiences that you're getting. And it makes me think about what you shared earlier about just like, you know, your approach to saying yes to internships and saying yes to all these opportunities where, you know, I think we live in a world where I think, you know, over recent years, there's more and more recognition of the fact that there's multiple ways to learn and multiple ways to build skills. And the classroom can be a great opportunity to get that exposure, but it's not the only one. And sometimes through those projects, whether they're the grunt assignments or you know, they're sort of a step in your broader development, saying yes to them is not going to have deleterious effects on your career. It actually may open up a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, totally agree. And you know, look, in hindsight, there's lots of things that I would have done differently in how I approached my education and things as well. But a lot I wouldn't change either. And so, you know, continuing on that, I mean, much to the chagrin of some of my professors, I would skip class at times in order to spend more time in the office at the internships, because I felt like I was learning so much from people in watching them actually operate as a business professional. And I worked my ass off doing it as well. So you know, in that, I think part of the lesson is, and even part of the lesson for the earlier part of the conversation, there's a lot in life that is out of your control. There's a lot in life that feels out of your control that actually you can be creative and figure out ways to influence and impact more than you might ever imagine possible. And then there's a lot that's in your control, and you got to take advantage of that too. And getting those three buckets right, I think, more than you get them wrong, you're never going to get them all right, is what will really help you maximize how much growth you can have, how much you can contribute, how successful you can be in any type or walk of life, let alone your professional career.
Yeah, I think that's really solid. And it makes me think, and you know, someone who tends to be a little bit more anxious, I try to tell myself this, you know, just on an ongoing basis, but like a lot of success, right, is showing up. It's having a good attitude. It's showing up. It's asking the right questions. And, you know, you're bound to make some mistakes. You're bound to, maybe, you know, you have to get some feedback and do something differently or do it over again. But putting yourself out there and being the person that is really open to development, it yields dividends. So I think that's, you know, some really powerful examples that you gave. And you know, it sort of makes me question if we look at this a little bit differently. A lot of the you know, questions I've asked you and examples you've shared have been sort of about you know, people who may have disabilities, who are thinking about, you know, their career or their development. But you know, we definitely have folks who are you know, participating today who whether they have disabilities or they don't. You know, they might be direct people leaders, they might be leaders of larger teams or organizations. You know, do you have any recommendations for those folks in those leadership positions for how they can foster the development and the growth of people with disabilities for leadership roles?
Yeah, so let me approach it a couple ways. First, I think of three areas, or maybe three components to leadership that are important that I try to really keep in mind. One is, I think, leader, and this is universal, you know, with a disability, without a disability, it's irrelevant. One is, I think leaders need to find a balance between confidence and humility. You have to be able to be confident enough to make tough decisions and make decisions. You have to be humble enough to know that you're not going to always have the answers, and that you need to learn, always continue to have a growth mindset. So having that balance, which can feel contradictory at times, I think is really important. Another I talked about on the individual side, but I think it's important as a leader, and maybe the perspective has two sides to it, is knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, and leaning into them. But as a leader, it's also then understanding that of the people in your teams and being somebody who is helping to remove barriers for them that will lessen some of the impact where somebody may have weaknesses and strengthen opportunities based on their strengths. And so I think as a leader, you have a tremendous opportunity to help facilitate that, and it gets the most out of people, where again you both win. And the last is I continue to learn more and more how truly important the power of diversity is in teams, and with knowing that we all have different strengths and different weaknesses, and that is only heightened that much more when you think about different backgrounds and abilities, and every way you could think about diversity. It's so important, and so making sure that you are creating teams that have that diversity is really important, and then that you're supporting people with those diverse backgrounds. I'll give you a quick anecdote, and it was a lesson I learned the hard way. And this has nothing to do with the disability space, but it's applicable to any environment. I was a relatively young manager. I had just gone to Asia. I was working in Hong Kong at the time, and was really proud of myself for trying to build this strong leadership team, and that we would be, you know, working together and making decisions together. And so I was very open about pitching problems or questions to them, and I wanted like good, healthy debate, and nobody would speak up, and I couldn't figure out why. I was giving a good opportunity for people to voice their opinions, and after trying it a couple different ways and never being able to move the needle much, I pulled one of my directs aside and asked for, you know, their feedback as to what was I doing wrong, or why were people being so hesitant to speak up. And she gave me good, direct, honest feedback, which was I would ask for their opinions, they would share their opinions, and then I would start debating with them in front of their peers about the opinion that they had just shared. And what I thought was healthy conversation and healthy debate, they saw as humiliating. And, you know, here they had the courage to speak up, and then I kind of chopped them off at the knees in front of their peers. And what it taught me was I needed, if I wanted to get the most out of that team of directs, I couldn't expect them to change to meet my style. I needed to actually adjust my communication to get their strengths to shine. And again, that can be applied to any group. But like I said earlier, I think in the abilities space, the opportunity is that much greater because people have these incredible, unique gifts and extreme strengths. But if you don't address some of the challenges or their needs, you don't get any of it, or you get a much lower version of that potential, and the opportunity cost is so much greater. So as a leader, your job is to try and help identify those kinds of situations, and remove those barriers, give people as much opportunity to be as valuable as possible. And again, if you do, I think they are more successful, but you will be, and your business will be too.
Yeah, really, really great points. And I think that shows, right, that there's power in being vulnerable and soliciting feedback on both sides, right? Whether you're an individual contributor or you're a leader of people and teams. That's a really, really good point that you made. And I guess just sort of moving a little bit more concretely on that question too. You did mention removing barriers, and I think it's clear one way that you did that was through like directly talking to a colleague and trying to find out how people were interpreting information and how you could make an adjustment. But are there any other sort of best practices that you recommend in terms of helping to remove those barriers? I know everyone is trying to create a culture where success and authenticity are core, but easier said than done. So would love to just hear any thoughts you have on that.
It's a hard one. And they're all unique, and individuals are unique there as well. I hope that I am somebody who my reports feel comfortable being open with, but I also am realistic enough to know that that's never always going to be the case. And you have to respect people's privacy and things like that as well. So you can't just go off on a mission to like solve everybody's problems if they're not open or comfortable bringing those problems to you to solve as well. Sometimes you have to support people by letting them struggle through some of those issues until they're ready to ask for help. Other times, I think that you can focus on really trying to support people to maximize their gifts. And so, as you see people with strengths emerging, it's giving them more opportunity or supporting them in those areas rather than only focusing on trying to sweep in and support them in areas that they may be struggling with. And I think that if you can do that, actually, as people then have those wins, that's the kind of stuff that makes them more confident to also address some of the areas that they may be struggling with as well. So I don't have a great recipe for it. I do think that it all goes back to, though, trying to be, if you are authentic and sincere with people, that you will have more mutual respect than if you're not, and that will lead to the kind of environment and relationship and culture that will be as constructive as possible. Doesn't guarantee it's going to be easy, and results still matter. And in work, you gotta pay attention to the bottom line, right? So that is another pressure that you're all dealing with.
Right. But I think what you added in, which again, easier said than done, but celebrating the wins, giving the feedback of what folks are doing well, as where there can be improvements. Because I think when folks feel that there is that clear communication of here's where I'm exceeding goals, here's where I'm performing really solidly, it makes them feel built up, which makes it sometimes easier to be authentic about challenges too. So that is really good. And lastly, before we transition to some of the audience Q&A, as we reflect on this this month, this day, and celebrating people with disabilities and the strengths, resolve, the diversity of the community, are there any parting words that you have for our audience before we transition into their questions?
Yeah, this may seem obvious, but I think we all need to hear it from time to time. Every single person on this call has unique gifts and strengths, and you need to make sure that you remind yourself of that every once in a while. I'm in a fortunate position where I get to see people who are just absolutely standout, incredible, achieving, things that are where they're raising the bar on what's possible by any metric, and they happen to have a disability. And so that's like in my face, maybe more than it is for others at times. But every single one of us has gifts and unique strengths, and yet, whether you're in the disability space or not, you also have hurdles in life that you got to deal with, and they're very real too. And so I would just encourage you to lean in on both. Don't feel guilty or discouraged where you have actual strengths. You should be owning those and celebrating those and maximizing how you can leverage them. And in the areas that you have hurdles, you don't need to face those on your own either. There's lots of people that can help you. And what's beautiful is your strengths aren't going to be the same as the next person's, and their, the hurdles that they're trying to overcome aren't going to be the same as yours. And so you can have really great symbiotic relationships with people where you're helping each other. And that's where I think as people that's like the beauty in relationships in general. So I just would encourage you to be that person for somebody else and let somebody else be that person for you as well.
Great advice. I'm probably going to write it down. I think I think that's a really great way to frame it, and really appreciate you answering all my questions, Mike. And I see we have a few audience questions that are submitted as well, so would love to dive into those. One that I see here, and I think it's for both you and I, is how are each of you bringing your strengths to the Lyme junior and senior boards? What do you see as next opportunities? So I'll let you take it, Mike, and then I'm happy to add in.
I don't know if this is, you'd have to ask Susan if this is has been valuable or not. But I think one of the things I've tried to do as chair is push us to try things, and be willing to take a risk and get something wrong, learn from it, and try something else. I think generally nonprofits are risk adverse, and largely you should be. Like, you have a fiduciary responsibility that is different from a for-profit organization. But you have to try stuff as well. You can't be so afraid of failure that you try, otherwise you're not going to grow. And for us, I look at the impact that Lyme Connect has on its network members, and people use descriptions of it being life-changing, and that's common to hear. And so with that, I feel tremendous responsibility to try and expand the network of people that we can have that kind of an impact on. And so pushing us to try things and be different was something that I felt was a critical part of driving that growth. But it causes discomfort, like, because I'm constantly kind of pushing people out of their comfort zone on that approach as well.
I love the sort of test and learn approach, and I think it yields a lot of great opportunity. It's easy to rest on your laurels, but when you try different approaches and think about new opportunities and white space that you can tackle, I think that's really important. I'm going to piggyback on a lot of what you shared. I feel like for me, when I think about my strengths, I feel like a lot of it is around connecting folks to to each other, and it's also about speaking authentically, and for me, a big priority is growing our community, like you said, Mike, where the individuals who are touched by the programs and services and network connections that Lyme provides are substantial. And my goal, and I know the NextGen Board's goal, is to try to socialize the benefits of Lyme membership with as many people as we can, and to continue engagement opportunities for the folks that are already part of the network. So I know our groups are working closely together. So next question here is it's about being a parent of a child with a learning disability, and just having interest in how you can best support a child to be successful in their personal life, and also just in their future professional endeavors too.
That's hard. So our son is dyslexic and has ADHD, and was diagnosed about 2 years ago with that. And so that's a very real journey that we're going through. And, I think about what worked or didn't work in my relationship with my parents as I was going through this, and they were going through that as well. And we were all kind of learning together as too. And it's hard. It's about supporting him, as it's ultimately his journey, not mine. And that's really difficult, because as a parent, you want to protect your children. That they're not making all the right decisions for themselves. And yet there's certain decisions that they are mature enough and old enough to make for themselves, and others where they're not. So I don't have a great answer, other than it's like, you got to be willing to struggle through it. We do as much as we can to try and help educate ourselves. We try and do as much as we can to help educate him. We try to let him have some say. I mean, one debate that we have wrestled with is like, should he take medicine or not for his ADHD? And that's not a black and that's a very polarizing conversation, and not a black and white one either, but it's one that we felt like he needed to be part of that conversation with us, and not just something that we could decide for him. But that was an example. I think at the end of the day, you got to love him, and you're not going to make all right decisions, and keep learning as you go. I wish I had a better recipe.
No, I mean, I think that those are ongoing life challenges to wrestle through, and certainly drawing from your own personal experience, is valuable. But I don't think there's a clear cut black and white answer. And I think about my own journey, and for myself, I went to a supportive school growing up, but as you progress through the years, I think advocacy skills are really important to to try to equip children with. And my parents were big on sort of teaching me to develop advocacy skills. And I know that as I got older, high school, college, that became really important. Being able to articulate, how I was feeling, what I needed to be successful in academic settings, but also in the workplace, was really important. And I agree with your sentiment, Mike. You sort of have to struggle through it to find your sort of authentic perspective and voice. And it's an ongoing journey still, but I would say just being able to teach kids how to advocate for themselves, and how to appreciate their strengths and areas of weakness or opportunity, I think is good too, because being able to confront that head on is just, I think, a good life lesson. Okay, so I think we sort of answered it, but there was a question about just dealing with challenging workplace dynamics, and and how to advocate for yourself in the workplace, especially if you're hitting roadblocks and it may feel difficult to advocate for yourself. So I guess the only thing I would add into that is not being afraid to connect with other people with disabilities. I think that can be really empowering. For myself, joining the Lyme Network has been, a big piece of that. I don't know, Mike, if you have anything else to share before we pass it off to Susan to give some concluding remarks.
No, I'll yield the floor. Thank you, though, Jonathan, for your participation with Lyme Connect and also with this event today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike.
Well, and I'd like to close by thanking you both. That was a fabulous conversation. And I know that everyone on the call, regardless of what their background is and their interest, took away a lot of tips and hot points there. I love the fact that you focused a lot on strengths. That's really big with Lyme Connect, of course. And the fact that disability is one element of who you are, but owning it and finding out what that gives you in life is super important, as is supporting others and building community. So thank you both. That was powerful. And I appreciate you sharing your own leadership with everyone else. For those of you who have joined us today, just a reminder, you can go to our website, again, regardless of your reason for joining or your background, and join our Lyme Connect community as a person with a disability, as a corporate or university partner, or as a friend, ally, parent. There are a ton of resources in there focused on intersectionality, on different types of disabilities. One last plug, if you are someone who has a disability, by all means join. There are a lot of webinars and materials in there on whether, when, and how to disclose a disability. I know that's one question we had that we were not able to get to. And then also, if you're a person with a disability, you can take StrengthsFinder's assessment for no charge when you're a member of the Lyme Network and understand what, again, those strengths are. It's very important to me to surround myself with others who have balancing strengths, and we look at our team from that perspective as well. So again, thank you all for joining us. This is our kickoff for International Day for People with Disabilities. And I hope you have a great rest of the week. Take a look for the recording to come your way. Thank you.